The Bengals added 8 players in the 2023 NFL Draft. Bengals Director of Scouting Mike Potts is here to break down every pick, discuss the Bengals strategy, and how the roster is shaping up for the 2023 season.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome in to the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm James Rapien. You're going to hear our interview with Mike Potts just coming up in 1 second. And yes, I will be joined by Jake Liscow. But thank you so much for making us your first listen here on Locked On Bengals. Shout out to the everydayers out there that have listened throughout the pre-draft process, throughout the draft, and certainly today, where we look back at the Bengals' 8 picks with the Director of Scouting, Mike Potts. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. It's sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on a journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. The Bengals, they got faster. They certainly got more athletic. They didn't get a tight end. They didn't address the offensive line. Interesting stuff. Let's dive into that and so much more with Bengals Director of Scouting, Mike Potts.
We're now joined by Cincinnati Bengals College Scouting Director, Mike Potts. Second year in a row that we've talked with Mike around the same time last year about the Cincinnati Bengals draft class. And Mike, we appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on and talking with us again. Hard to start anywhere besides the first round pick. Myles Murphy, by every consensus board, seen as a guy that was not likely to be available to you guys, but you did your homework. You had him in for the top 30 visit, which honestly was a bit of an eye-opener to me personally, that you guys were doing the due diligence on a guy that I expected to be long gone. That must have been a pretty exciting thing for you guys who have done the work ahead of time and to have had that opportunity.
It was. We were not necessarily expecting him to be there. To be honest with you, part of my job is putting together the 45 guys that we decide to do formal interviews with at the Combine. And Myles didn't necessarily have any major character issues that we needed to dig on or anything like that. So we actually ended up trimming him off of our 45 interviews for the Combine. And that's part of the reason we decided to later bring him in for a visit. We still didn't think it was likely he was going to be there at 28, but just to do our due diligence, we decided later on in the process, we're like, hey, let's bring this guy in. He obviously, it may be a little bit of a stretch of projecting him to be there that late in the first round, but you never know. You could trade around, different scenarios could play out. So just to kind of cross all our T's and dot all our I's, so to speak, we decided to bring him in and get him in front of ownership, get in front of the whole coaching staff and scouting staff and all of that. And I'm really glad that we did, because it gives you that much more conviction on a guy when the scenario plays out like it did. And like you said, we weren't necessarily expecting him to be there, but when he was there, it was an easy selection for us.
Mike, it seemed like the pick, and usually in the first round, even, for example, the first pick, usually maybe it's TV purposes, but the pick isn't officially in for multiple minutes. It felt like the Myles pick was in within like 30 seconds of you guys going on the clock on the TV side. Was it that quick and as simple as following your board? And if it fell that way, you were going with Myles Murphy. You didn't have to talk about it at all at that point?
The decision was made that quickly. We already knew before, we were officially on the clock that's the direction that it was going to go. But to answer your question, it was not in that quick, because the league makes us wait till 5 minutes run off the clock in the first round. The rest of rounds 2 through 7, they say you can submit it as quickly as you want to. So maybe some of those were about as quick as it seemed on TV. I think for TV purposes, they want us to wait 5 minutes in the first round so they can spread it out, spread their coverage out of the previous pick, show all the highlights that they need to show, obviously get time in for the commercial breaks and everything like that. So there was at least 5 or 6 minutes off of the clock before we submitted that one. But in later rounds, we did submit it relatively quick. It wouldn't be right, as soon as we get on the clock. But my job is actually to type it in and submit it into the league electronically. And what I like to do is wait till Zach gets the player on the phone, make sure we're good there, and we're in touch with them. And then we may just wait another minute or two, make sure we're not blown away with the last minute, trade offer from another team. But that's kind of how it plays out. And I was alerted to there were certain times where it looked like we came on the clock, and then the pick was submitted almost immediately. But that wasn't. Sometimes that may have been the case, but it wasn't necessarily as quick as it seemed in some cases.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
real quick, have you ever had a typo submitting a guy, or do you check it like 52 times before you hit enter?
I check it. I don't think I've had a typo. That's not to say that I haven't had a million typos in my life. We type scouting reports into our system. I do that for a living, and I'm not the greatest typer in the world. So I've had a ton of typos, but I'm pretty paranoid about getting everything correct on that. It's just the round, the pick number, the player's position, name, school, and yeah, I'll double check it 100 times before we put it in. But that's only been the case, I think, since the COVID year was. So the 2020 draft is the first time they did that. Prior to that, it was just like an old-fashioned conference call that you actually I don't know if the general public would notice it, but we don't necessarily need to have the person at our quote-unquote Bengals table at the location of the draft like we used to. Like we would call it in, they would write the name down on the sheet, pick number 1, round number 1, Joe Burrow, quarterback, Louisiana State, or whatever. That's not necessarily the case anymore. But there is a conference call and there is a league-wide Zoom in case for some reason that pick submission form is not working that we type it in on, or if we need to, we can pick up our cell phone and call in. So if for some reason one of those ways aren't working, we've got backup plans.
Well, I had a few different follow-up questions I was going to go with. One of them was about how excited you are about text-to-speech and that technology improving so that you can cut down on those typos. One of them was going to be about what teams are doing when the clock ticks down and why it takes so long, but you already answered that one. So we'll go back to Myles Murphy here real quick. A guy that was a very highly touted recruit coming out of high school, hyper athletic, very explosive, crazy athlete for his size. Obviously that shows up, and the high-end flashes on the tape at Clemson are incredible. What was the biggest selling point for you guys? What are you most excited about with getting Myles Murphy in the building?
I think really it's just his overall talent and upside and where he can be. He's still a young guy that's really only played for 3 years. He's still only 21 years old. And, I've said it before that there's really not too many people in the world with it sounds like I'm joking, but in the world with his physical traits. Now, has he put it all together yet? No. Can he still get better with his pass rush plan, with his secondary rush moves and just overall polish to his game? He still has a lot of room for upside in a lot of those areas. And Marion Hobby coaching him is an excellent D-line coach. He's got a Clemson connection there as well, having coached there in the past and has a relationship with Myles already previous to this pre-draft process, going through everything. So we think the upside's through the roof, and just the freaky physical traits that he has, and the fact that he's already, in our opinion, a really good player, but where he could be, maybe let's say year 2, 3, 4 down the line is pretty exciting.
How rare is it for a player like that who, albeit maybe needs to add a pass rush move or two, but has all of those physical traits, like you said, falling to 28? Because it felt sort of rare when I went back and looked at it, but based on your experience, it seems like, at least at my end, it seems like they go top 10, top 15 usually. So based on your experience, is that the case with a guy like Myles Murphy usually?
I think it is very rare. Like I said, there's not too many people with those physical traits to begin with at all. I think just in this draft, there was a lot of teams that had different needs. You had the quarterbacks going up there, which we weren't necessarily in that market, obviously. And, it's just different teams' boards are play out differently, and they have different needs. So I can't speak for them. I know we do a lot of projections and a lot of homework. We thought obviously it's not 100%. We wouldn't have brought him in for a visit if we didn't think there was any chance of him falling there. But we didn't think it was likely, and we're glad that it played out that way. And I don't know. I mean, I guess thinking back on it, he had a little bit of a hamstring injury that he wasn't able to test at the combine or at his first pro day. He had his own personal pro day later in April, so maybe that caused him to fly under the radar a little bit. But I mean, there's a lot of good scouts and a lot of good coaches that evaluate the players in the draft around the league. So they're doing their work on these guys just like we are. So I don't have a great answer for why he fell that far, but we're glad that he did.
We'll get back to our interview with Mike Potts in 1 second, but today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is therapy that is really the most convenient therapy that you can find. And it's easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you. Never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. And when you spend all of your time giving, it can leave you feeling stretched thin, burned out. And that's why therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. And BetterHelp is a great option if you've considered trying therapy. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. And all you have to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists at any time at no charge at all. So find your balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Certainly a lot of first-round surprises to the external observer, and I'm not going to name any names. That would feel rude, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't have access to as the general public, and even stuff that I assume you guys don't have access to because every team is doing it for themselves. You're not necessarily sharing information about character evaluations, medical evaluations, your own interviews with the players, intelligence you're gathering from your network of college coaches. What else is there out there, like GPS data versus the combine testing? Are there other important pieces of the puzzle that we out here in the world not working in NFL front offices don't really think about that could explain some of the stuff we saw in the first round?
Yeah, GPS data is really big. Like you said, different teams use different suppliers of that information. There's a few different companies that supply that data. Some of it's done from the film. Some of it's done obviously from information that you get from colleges, from the chips in their jerseys that they have both at practice and at games. So that's something that we've done. I've been going through Clemson, in this case, a long time. That's something that we've got information on guys like T. Higgins coming out of there, different GPS numbers that Clemson staff has provided. And, maybe a hang up on a guy like T is that he didn't run the fastest 40 in the world. But when you look at that play speed, it's up there with, the higher end of guys at the wide receiver position. So, yeah, there's a lot of different things. There's the analytic angle, the PFF stuff that I believe every team has all of that data, but then it's just a matter of what you do with it and how you analyze it. And like you said, different, I think a guy that is a high character risk is generally that way for almost every team throughout the league. But a lot of guys fall in the middle of really good character and a high character risk. So it's a matter of connections that you have on the staff. And maybe you go through a school and talk to 10 people and 8 of them are speaking highly of a guy, but you talk to the right person that has the right story. And that would be a case maybe where we would have something negative, or it could be positive on a guy, or Team X, whatever other team that drafted a guy or didn't draft a guy could potentially have information that everybody else doesn't have. Because like you said, it's not shared universally between all 32 teams. We've got to go out and scout and do our own work and own research on all of these players.
The GPS tracking data, how is it more important or less important for a guy? And let's look at day 2 for a guy like DJ Turner versus Jordan Battle. On one hand, you have Turner, who runs a 4.26 and plays super fast, and the concerns, at least outside, would be more size, not speed. On the other hand, you have a guy in Jordan Battle who's praised for his instincts and how smart he is in the playbook and just knowing the system, starting as a freshman for Nick Saban in that defense, but doesn't run a 4.2 and isn't necessarily the fastest guy in the world. How does the GPS, how valuable is that when you're evaluating those two players, which you obviously liked both, but for different reasons?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's really a system of checks and balances. We're comparing the 40 time with the GPS numbers that we get. And then really, at the end of the day, most importantly, is what we see with our eyes scouting the guy. And we evaluate all of these guys play speed. So we may think a guy plays in the 4.4 range, but then he goes to the combine and he runs 4.55, and then we have GPS numbers to back up maybe what our eyes saw. And he kind of equates to that 4.4 range, whatever that is in miles per hour on the GPS. So it's checks and balances. It's obviously both of those guys being DBs. You got to be able to run in this league to cover and cover ground and to defend the run game as well. So it's very important. But I think at the end of the day, if we thought the guy had slow play speed, that would be more of an eliminating factor than a slow 40 time or GPS numbers that didn't add up, because we're drafting the guy to be a football player, obviously, and not the guy who can. There's plenty of guys who can run a fast 40 that don't play fast on the field, whether that's due to instincts or football intelligence or a number of different factors.
With DJ Turner in the second round, that's 2 straight years of second round corners and some pretty athletic guys there. Last year you had to trade up. This year in the third round, you're able to trade back and presumably feel pretty comfortable that you're going to get the guy you're targeting after making that relatively little, right? Just a couple of picks, move back in the third round. Was there any pressure to move up this year at any point where, like last year, you had to trade up twice to get guys you were really coveting? Did that happen this year? Or how do you just decide kind of where you can trade back and get a guy and where you might need to trade up based on what you're projecting the other teams around you to do?
I don't think there was as much pressure as last year because we ended up having more players available to us that we really liked. Last year, I think I talked to you guys about this last year. There was a number of guys, it seemed like in every round, that were just getting swept out from under our feet, a handful of picks right before us, and it really thinned out. And then in the case of Cam Taylor-Britt comes to mind, we wanted to address the corner position, and we felt like we were dropping down a level of player, especially at the corner position and really just overall on our board, regardless of position. So we went up to make that move. I think it played out a little bit better for us this year. We still considered moving up. If there's guys that are falling that we really like, we're always going to field those calls. We're always going to make the calls. We're always going to stay in constant communication of the teams both in front of us and behind us. It just didn't end up working out. We probably went into the draft this year with the mindset of hopefully trying to add a pick or two more so than give up picks. But if you give up a pick, you can always recoup it later on with a trade back later on in the draft if you move up. And part of that was because we liked the depth as the draft went on in some of those mid to later rounds. And it even would have been nice if we would have added another pick or two more than we did, but that's just the way that it played out with adding that extra 6th rounder and ended up with 8 draft picks. So we're happy with the way it played out. Where it's always a really bad feeling when guys that you like get scooped up right in front of you. And that wasn't, obviously there's guys that we really like that went before us, but it just didn't thin out as much as it did maybe in some of the previous years.
And when you're making those draft moves, there's like 5 or 6 charts now out there that evaluate who won the trade in terms of draft pick compensation. You guys have your own charts, I assume, that are helping you to approximate what you should be getting in return and how you guys feel about, quote unquote, winning those draft pick trades.
We do. We have 3 charts really that we pay the most attention to. One of them being the primary that we think is pretty much universal. We communicate with other teams every year just to make sure nothing major has changed on what they're using, just so we know we're speaking the same language when it comes down to crunch time and you're getting close to being on the clock there on draft day. So we've tried a little bit to mesh together those 3 charts, and just they're a little bit different point systems, a little bit. Some of them maybe value the later picks a little bit heavier, and some of them maybe value the earlier picks a little bit more. So we've tried to mesh them together and form them into one. That's kind of an ongoing process that we're constantly going through. That's something that we're going to meet on as well this offseason and continue to tweak it and just make sure that we're getting appropriate value for these picks. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to a gut decision. Like, hey, how bad do we want to add this pick, or how bad do we want to go up and get this player, and is it worth giving up this compensation to make the deal happen?
When you trade down and make that decision, or make the decision to trade up for that matter, do teams, if you trade up, say, hey, who are you trading up for? and vice versa. When the Chiefs call and it feels like you're going to work out a deal to go from 92 to 95, do you say, hey, who are you taking? Because obviously if they were taking Jordan Battle, you might not want to make that deal.
It depends how close of a relationship you have with teams. We've got good relationships with a lot of guys around the league, and if it's a guy that you do have a good relationship with, they will tell you. They usually won't tell you until after they've already made that final determination. They're not going to tell you hypothetically like, hey, we're leaning towards this guy. But I have heard that happening. I think there was a story that came out in this draft between I think it was the Bills and the Jaguars. They were talking about that. At least I saw some quotes or something on that. Or if they didn't come out and tell them who they were taking, they at least hinted heavily at who it was going to be. So
I think they said he's big. Yeah, he's big or something.
Oh yeah, like big, medium,
or
small,
medium,
or whatever.
Medium, medium for Kincaid or something like that.
Yeah. So we're reading the same thing, but it does happen. You try. You're going to make the move either way. So at least in our case, we're not gonna ask them, and then they say, "Oh, we're taking this guy," because it can end up we can make the trade, and then they could turn around and trade it, or they could not take the guy that they're saying. But again, it comes down to that trust factor and guys that you have strong relationship with, and then usually they'll tell you who they're going to take if they've made that final determination.
Talking about these DBs that are the new additions for your team in 2023, can you talk about picking a guy at safety where we, covering the team, did not think we were going to see a day 1, day 2 pick on safety? So far, to the point that like in the draft board that we put together every year, we didn't even really watch safeties this year because we were pretty confident that, maybe later. But Jordan Battle, obviously screaming value to you. There's a pretty easy way to imagine his path onto the field really early in his career in Cincinnati, especially given that he got onto the field really early in Alabama. But can you talk about that pick and how you see that fit working out with the position that there isn't a screaming need? And really that's many positions, but especially at safety.
Yeah, at the end of the day, taking Jordan Battle was just sticking to our board. We love the player, we love the person, his character, and everything he's about. I'm sure you guys have heard all the stories on that, on him as a person and our regard for him as a player as well. I think at the end of the day, you can't go wrong adding good players. Obviously, we lost both of our starting safeties to free agency. Obviously, we drafted Dax last year, and then we signed Nick Scott this year. But that being said, you don't know how injuries are going to play out throughout the year. Knock on wood. Hopefully we don't have to deal with that type of situation, but even taking injuries out of it, it just gives your defense that much more versatility. We all know Dax is a very versatile player. That's part of what attracted us to him and to take him at the bottom of the first round last year. So he's kind of a chess piece that you potentially could move around. It can give our coaches some more flexibility that way. And Nick Scott and Jordan Battle are versatile players as well. So it just gives you that much more flexibility. There's a lot of offenses that we have to match up with. Obviously, safeties kind of are main contributors in stopping some of these weapons at the tight end position across the league. So we're always looking for ways to stop those guys, and then also covering running backs and receivers and stopping the run as well. We think all three of those guys are very versatile, well-rounded safeties. Potentially, could we get all three of them on the field at the same time? I'm sure that'd be a better question for Lou to answer, but I think we definitely have that available to us as a possibility.
This may be a dumb question, but how hard is it to stick to your board, given that you have the certain ranking and all of those things, and there's been months and years of work that goes into it. At the same time, I know, at least in some organizations, public consensus could get in the way. There could be a player that isn't supposed to fall, that's supposed to be a top 50 pick, that's there in the 70s in some years or 90s or whatever the case is, falls to day 3. Is that challenging at all? Does that matter? And have you ever been in any room where public consensus or outside voices do impact the draft board and sticking with the plan?
It is hard. I think at the end of the day, like you said, you hit it on the head. There's been years that have went into putting that board together. So at the end of the day, you have to trust your evaluations and stay disciplined. I don't think it's public pressure as much as sometimes you want to fill in the holes on the roster in terms of positions of need. And, even taking the positions out of it, just look at the side of the ball. I mean, how many picks in a row did we go, or how many out of the previous 10 picks were defense? So you're like, at some point, it'd be nice to draft an offensive player, but at the same time, you don't want to jump down a level of player. And, just to take an offensive player, and Jordan Battle was our highest rated player, obviously, through the roof character evaluations on top of our high regard for him as a player. So really it was just staying disciplined. There is temptation, there to go a different direction. As scouts, we get paid to give our opinion, and we don't always agree on everything. So there's different points of view on every different scenario, it seems like. But at the end of the day, we've had good luck with sticking to our board, and that's what we did in this case here with Battle.
That's Bengals Director of Scouting, Mike Potts. We thank him. We thank Emily Parker as well for getting that interview scheduled. And it's something we try to do annually, where we sit down. We talked with Steve Radisevich after the main part of free agency was in the books, and Cincinnati added a couple of players since then. But then we also try to talk with Mike Potts after the draft process and get his thoughts on how things played out, because especially when you're drafting as late as you are in recent years for the Bengals, you never know what's going to happen. And whether it was Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 or the fact that they didn't take an offensive player until day 3 of the draft, I think there were some things that they didn't necessarily plan on doing, but they stuck to their board, and they certainly deserve credit for that. Jake and I are back on Wednesday for Thursday's show, Wednesday evening. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And for Jake Liscow, I'm James Rapien. Thank you so much for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast.